A stunning result.
The UK votes to leave the EU.
After 43 years in an historic referendum.
The European Union, as we now know it today, came about through a number of treaties or agreements between European countries. After the horror of World War II, people wanted to find ways to ensure future peace and cooperation between the different countries in Europe. So, in the late 1940s, the idea of a European community was discussed. Then, in 1951, the first union was formed between 6 countries: Belgium, the Netherlands, Luxembourg, Italy, France, and West Germany. They agreed to work together on production of coal and steel, materials that were essential for rebuilding military forces. They felt that by working together, it would help avoid any more wars between the countries. By 1957, these countries felt the union was going so well, they decided to take things further. They set up the European Economic Community, or EEC. This aimed to make it easier to buy and sell a wide range of goods, not just coal and steel, throughout the 6 countries that were members. It also tried to make it easier for people to travel, live and work within these countries. Soon, other countries wanted to join the EEC, and the membership started to grow. Some people in Europe were against their countries joining and protested to keep their independence. Then, as now, any country that wanted to join had to apply, and the existing members decided whether to let them join or not. The UK applied, and after being turned down twice, finally joined in 1973.
It is a step towards the participation of the peoples of our countries.
As the EEC grew in size, they worked on ways to make it better. In 1986, our Prime Minister at that time, Margaret Thatcher, signed the Single European Act, which further reduced barriers to trade between the different countries. However, not everyone was in agreement with the UK's close relationship with the European community. For example, this headline appeared in the Sun newspaper in 1990. They chose to run this headline because some people in the UK felt that Jacques Delors, President of the European Commission, was meddling too much in UK affairs. In 1993, the Maastricht Treaty officially renamed the EEC as the European Union and introduced more cooperation between governments in areas like defence and justice. They also set out plans to bring the economies of the member countries closer together. In 2002, the euro was born. Currencies like French francs, Dutch guilders and Italian lira all became history, and the euro became the currency of 12 EU countries, with only the UK, Denmark and Sweden choosing to keep to their own currency. Countries continue to join the European Union, and in 2004 we saw the biggest ever single enlargement of the EU, when 10 countries joined. While membership continues to grow, there is still debate in many countries about the advantages and disadvantages of working together in this way. With nearly 30 countries now members and more wanting to join, the challenge of the future will be to make sure that as the European Union gets bigger, it still works for the good of the people who live and work in it.
I wanted to go over to John Gray, who has a somewhat different view. Many of you have read his books, seen his writing in a variety of publications. He's now formally emeritus professor of European thought at the London School of Economics. John, a few thoughts on the survival of the euro?
Thank you very much. I think over the medium term of 10, 15, possibly 20 years, it can't survive. Of course, it has been stabilized through the crisis of the last year or so, and many supporters of the euro, going back 20 years when I heard a talk by Oscar Fischer stating this view, anticipated that there would be great crises and argued that the result of the crises would be to strengthen the euro. So for supporters of the euro, this is not anything new. But I don't think the euro has been strengthened. It's been stabilized at the level of the currency and the banking system, but at enormous social and human and economic cost in the Mediterranean countries. I don't think we sufficiently grasp the depth of the human and social damage involved in nearly 2/3 of Spanish youth, that's to say people under 25, being outside the labour market, unemployed for many years, with many years on current policies, even if they're tweaked at the edges after the recent election in Germany, many years of policies producing maybe 5 or 7 or 10 more years of mass unemployment in large parts of Europe. What will be the fates of these young people, not even looking at the older ones for the time being, if they've been out of the labour market for 5, 10, 15 years? It's a recipe, I think, for profound social alienation and ultimately for political instability. But the ultimate reason why I don't think the euro can survive is that, as supporters of the euro constantly remind us, it'll only work with banking union, and ultimately banking union, fiscal transfers, all the rest of it can only work with political union. And I don't think a political union in a Europe of this size, a eurozone, a euroland of this size, maybe if it was smaller, if it had stayed smaller, if it had been a monetary union of a few closely similar countries, it could have endured and possibly or possibly not turned into a political union. But at the size that it is now, with the membership that it has now, I think there cannot be anything like a functioning democracy. If it breaks down, and then I'll conclude, if it breaks down, how will that affect the world? Well, I think one of the risks here is to have an introverted European perspective. A breakdown of the euro, a collapse of the euro, would certainly be a very large event, and it would certainly affect many parts of the world. But it wouldn't be larger than in the impact on the world than that of a Chinese economic collapse, or even a rapid slowdown. Or to take a more likely possibility, although I don't say it's very likely, a failure of Abenomics, a large-scale failure of Abenomics, could have an absolutely cataclysmic effect on the world economy. So Europe isn't at the center of the world, even in the event of a cataclysm. There are many other things that could happen which would be equally or more cataclysmic. I hesitate to quote a European dictator, particularly not one who was not known for his sense of humor, but Mussolini observed somewhere, it's his only recorded joke, if he meant it as a joke, that ruling Italy was not impossibly difficult, simply pointless. And I guess at the back of this is the idea that if this absurd project founders, then we have chaos, catastrophe, disaster, murder, that it's the only possible, that there is no alternative to it. Well, I mean, James Galbraith has already pointed to a number of alternatives that could perhaps be explored within the existing structures, though I'm doubtful myself if any of them will be explored in time and on a large enough scale to prevent a further crisis. So I think it would be better now to start thinking about how to adapt to a major crisis further down the road. We can't know. It could be because of an external event. It could be because of internal political developments. But let me just underscore one point, which is a feature which has been commented upon by James and others, but which I think is not sufficiently appreciated. One of the features of Europe today is a return of the classical European demons of poisoned pathological politics. Practically every European country, some worse than others, Greece for obvious reasons, but not only Greece, Hungary, and also, by the way, Italy, have seen a return of anti-Semitic, anti-Roma, anti-gay, anti-immigrant policies, not just on the fringes of politics, but really poisoning the whole democratic culture. How does that affect Britain's position? Well, I'm not afraid of the consequence if it ultimately comes to it that we exit. I don't regard that as, in any sense, disastrous. What I think we're seeing now, in a sense, is that half of Europe, half of 21st century Europe, is being sacrificed in order to solve the 20th century German question. And I'm not sure that's a reasonable trade-off. If really we need to, if really we have to make a choice in Britain, and as I've said, the preference will be not to make it, but that doesn't mean the willingness to make it in the end is absent. As to whether to commingle our fates with this vast and already tarnished and even failing experiment or exit, then I think the likelihood is we'll exit, and I would support that. If it will focus on what's actually happening. It will try, as politicians and governments always do, not to pre-commit themselves too much. But if there is a major crisis in the Eurozone, I think it'll be big for obvious reasons. But I just make one comment since I'm speaking in America. I wouldn't take for granted that the net result would be damaging to the US. Obviously, American stock markets, bond markets could be shaken. But even as things are, America is the haven for global capital at the moment. It's flowing from the emerging markets back into America. If there was a major crisis in Europe, that could even accelerate that rate. I think the American experiment, so to speak, of building a genuine nation state, which Europe will never be, has produced something resilient enough that actually, on balance, the net effect could actually be benign in the case of America. So I think we're not in the early stages or the middle of a highly of an experiment which has problems, which is tarnished, which is difficult, but nonetheless will go on. We're in a period of artificial stasis and of artificial stabilization of institutions that are essentially unworkable. And in that context, the British position of remaining detached, whatever its sort of historical reasons, the German support of this project has also got profoundly historical reasons. The German question, which dominated the dark continent in much of the 20th century, both emerged from our history. I think that position in Britain has turned out to be, not through any excessive wisdom on our part, but has turned out to be the right one that we've adopted.